Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to look at the weekly metagame breakdown for the standard format, standard best of 3. If you're looking for best of 1, we covered it the other day. We're going to look at which decks have the highest win rate on the ladder. This week we're going to be focusing on Diamond Mythic Rank. Next week we'll cover just Mythic Rank and kind of see how things trend. Arena Championship was this past weekend, and it was won by Gruul, I believe. It was Gruul Dimir finals, large representation of Dimir. It was a fairly small consolidated. There's like less than 100 folks that played in it. So the numbers do kind of get skewed in that case because it's more of isolated. You metagame for what you expect in that case. But we'll look at the deck lists themselves. There's going to be 2 deck lists towards the end that are not translating just yet to the arena ladder, but in terms of volume of games, but have been doing well recently on MTGO, so we'll give you a sneak peek of those. We do the tournament kind of breakdowns later in the week from the MTGO side to kind of highlight these new innovative decks potentially, so you kind of get the full picture there. We also have a couple community decks at the end. So we get all this data from predominantly Untapped.gg, a companion tool that tracks user win rates. A link if you want to use Untapped is in the video description. I'll paste and timestamp all these deck lists as well, so you can copy and paste. As we've been mentioning all month, you'll see in the top left-hand corner, we have a charity goal ticker. Every penny I make off YouTube this month, I'm donating to a local Toronto-based food bank. So if you want to help out, just watch some videos, like, comment, whatever it takes to kind of push out these videos. We're not asking for any money from you. We're just trying to generate kind of impressions, views, stuff like that will help to donate to those in need. One other kind of random thing. I am playing in a Team Trios RCQ in January. I am the standard seat. I am lending my mono red cards to my buddy to play Pioneer version of the deck. So I'm likely going to be in Jeskai Convoke. If anybody has any primers or like guides, anything like that that's a little bit detailed that they can share or very experienced in the deck, welcome in any of that information. I need to speed run becoming super proficient at Jeskai Convoke since we have kind of the cards amongst my play group. Fortunately, Shieldreds are like $1 million here in Canada, so ain't playing Dimir. So we'll kind of go from there. Likely Jeskai or Gruul Delirium are kind of my choices there. But let's look at what's happening so far. So Dimir Midrange continues to be the most played deck, 11, almost 12%. Golgari Mid at about 8%. Gruul Prowess 7.5%. The Zur Domain decks at about 7%. Mono Red at about 7%. Then you have the Glyph decks, Azorius Artifacts at 4.5%. Jeskai Convoke's been making a little bit of an increase. It had a pretty good showing at the Arena Championship. And then we have the Tokens Control deck at 3.5%. So we see like Dimir kind of holding the top spot. Decline in Mono Red and a bit of a decline in Golgari, but seeing increases in Convoke, which like last week Convoke was like 2%. So it's doubled kind of its play rate. Simic Beanstalk kind of increasing as well recently. So looking at kind of the distribution, we have 29,000 games played in the last week, December 10th through to the 17th. Diamond and Mythic Rank. We're going to jump in 4-color Zur Overlords. So we have this deck here. So it is using kind of the Overlords. You cast their impending cost to get the value early. It triggers up the Beanstalk. And then you have Zur the Eternal Schemer in here. So this one here will let you animate. The really nice curves here is Overlord of the Hauntwoods on 3. Cast Zur on 4. You have the 5th mana available to animate the Overlord, get in for a bunch of damage, gain life, and then create a token. So with that there, you have Leyline Bindings that get cost reduction here, 1 mana removal, Sunfalls, Herd Migrations, kind of the domain decks we've seen. The kind of innovation in the recent weeks. Analyze the Pollen, helps you hit early land drops, plays on 1, and then later can be a tutor effect. And then you also have Elspeth Smite for some of the more aggressive decks. More Elspeth Smites, not on my watch for the aggressive matchups. Negates is cheap counters. Paw Patch, rarely flexible card. Deals with demons, Atraxas, enchantments as well. Rest in Peace, Graveyard Hate. Frillback, Artifact and Enchantment Hate. Graveyard Hate, Life Gain. Archangel, Beza for kind of the aggressively slanted decks. Vivian and Nissa for the grindy mid-range matchups. We then have Boros Prowess Mice. So kind of in the last little week or so, this one's at 66%. Mabel has seen a bit more play in some of these decks as a 1 to 2 of. This provides you another mouse for kind of the mouse package of Manifold Mouse, Emberheart, Heartfire Hero. It also provides you an equipment that can trigger Valiant. That gives you Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, so it makes any subsequent threats a little bit bigger. Boros mana base is kind of a mess, so you're playing Raucous Carnival in here. That can be untapped if either opponent's at 13 or less life. Sheltered by Ghosts, Shard Mage Rescue, kind of our enchantment package that we see in white, as well as Helix as the additional white cards to supplement what's normally a mono red shell. Lithomantic Barrage, really good against the Terror decks, Oculus, any sort of blue or white decks. Torch is cheap removal that exiles, destroy evil for bigger stuff. Knight of Grace is really sweet tech here. 2 mana, 2/2. First strike, doesn't really matter, but hexproof from black. So cut downs, go for the throats. Any of that targeted removal doesn't work. And it gets a power boost if an opponent controls a black permanent. Another sheltered, case for the grindier matchups, along with Screaming Nemesis for the red-based aggro decks. We have Azorius Glyph, Azorius Artifacts, 66.7. So this deck here, we have Leyline Axe that can assemble kind of your Embercleave at home, cheat it into play on your first turn if it's in your opener. Glyph animates any of your cheap artifacts. Between Leyline Axe, Steel Seraph, Honeycorn gets a lot better since it could become evasive or larger. You also have Mockingbird that can copy these types of effects. That makes it a bit stronger in respect. Novice Inspector makes you cheap tokens. Spyglass Siren makes you cheap tokens. Same with Case. Warden can tap and kind of get you some value there. You have Elspeth Smite, cheap removal, Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate, Destroy Evil, as well as Get Lost, flexible removal. Cheap counters and negate activated abilities. You shut off with Tidebinder, Graveyard Hate and Rest in Peace, and Lorn for Artifact. So you have some value engine pieces like that. So we have Simic Terror. This one's at 66%. So this is kind of the stock version. I'm actually going to just show this one was a couple percent lower at 59, but a lot of the decks are going this approach recently. So I'm going to show this one here. So if you have the stock list, it's fine. You can still play it, but I want to show where a lot of folks are moving. And this was from like Arena Championship and some of the MTGO leagues. So it's pretty easy at the main just to play Gloomlake Verge. It defaults to an island, and then through Hedge Maze or your basics, it turns on a black source. The black source in the main is only for Kicked Rona's Vortex, but this is just another cheap bounce effect. The core of the deck is you're putting cards into your graveyard, instants and sorceries to cast these big creatures at 1 to 2 mana. This town ain't big enough, can bounce your stuff and recast it. All these things trigger up the Beanstalk for card advantage. You can bounce and repeatedly recast Storm Chaser's talent for value. Graveyard sideboard, you have Ghost Vacuums, Minor Missteps for like the aggressive decks, Pick Your Poison, Flexible Removal, Herbology Instructor as a way to gain life. You can keep bouncing it back to hand for value. Negates, then you see 1 copy of Swamp that can be tutored with your land effects like Bushwhack, and then you have Nowhere to Run as cheap removal, as well as Terra Sunder with the kicker that gives you just kind of a broader range of things you can hit in terms of. Then have Gruul Prowess. So this version here, again, a lot of these decks are base red. This one here has the green cards for Innkeeper's Talent, multiple ways to turn on Valiant, give you some value there. You have Snakeskin Veil as protection in the main board. Otherwise, it's kind of your core mono red deck. Nemesis, Emberheart, Manifold, and then your aggressive 1-drop. Kind of supplement it. 1 copy of Restless Ridgeline. Creature line. Barrage, like we mentioned, more protection with Snakeskin, cheap removal and Torch and Obliterating Bolt, Paw Patch. So the benefit of going Gruul over, say, mono red, Paw Patch formation is one of the biggest cards in this deck. Having a clean answer to the 6/6 demons for various enchantments, super important in terms of the deck. You have Questing Druid in the sideboard for kind of the grindier matchups for some card advantage. You'll sometimes see a split of 2 Druid main, 2 side. Then you have Urbrass Forge as well for the grindier matchups. We have Jeskai Convoke. So this is likely the list I'm going to be running at the event. Actually, no, I'm going to be on the Mockingbird version. So the only difference between the one, so this one here is on 2 Clockwork Percussionists and 4 Case of the Gateway. The version I'm going to be running is 4 Mockingbird, -2, -2. but kind of the same core. Big kind of innovation, if you would, is just Sheltered by Ghost in the main. And then between Novice Inspector, Spyglass Siren, you have a lot of ways to kind of make cheap artifacts. The Mockingbird could come in as extra copies of Imidane's Recruiter. It can come in as like Resolute Reinforcement, could copy your opponent's stuff. So some value engines there. Sideboard, just cheap removal, flexible options, and then some counters for the big mana decks. So you just kind of adapt like that. Golgari Midrange, 63%. So Demon Package is available here, Archfiend and Unholy Annex. Some of these versions of the deck have been looking kind of shave some numbers to make them better against Dimir, because this just feeds into Fairy Mastermind. But like you'll even see something like Aklazotz, which is at times difficult for Dimir if they can't counter it to fully remove, since they don't play really exile-based removal. And the lifelink body, the flyer, can be a challenging threat. This one's a little bit more creature dense. Glissas, Preachers, Sentinels, Fiddleback main, one Ooze main with your Line of War package to get you ahead, and a bunch of cheap removal. In Stolson Sanctuary works really nice with the Annex as another demon. Cheap hand hate, graveyard hate, flexible removal, super for go wide, some recursion, lifelink, and then you have your Planeswalker package for Gruul. We have Temur Otter Prowess. So this one here, basically the engine. I kind of get bored explaining this one, but this taps for mana for your creatures. Flood Caller, whenever you cast non-creatures, untaps your mana. Combination of cards that lets you float, generate huge amounts of mana with cheap effects. This makes your creatures bigger. You can bounce stuff back with this town ain't big enough to get recast, and then just there. Sideboard options, Graveyard Hate. I didn't realize Blue Sun's Twilight was still legal. This will let you just gain control of a big thing. Cheap counters, Paw Patch, Pyroclasm for go wide, Scorching Dragonflighter, cheap removal, Nemesis for the aggressive decks, as well as Dissection Tool and Beanstalk for the grindier matchups. Gruul Delirium. So this is one of the other options I was considering. So this one here, the benefit of this deck here is a lot of your creatures dodge cut down and or go for the throat. Things like Wildfire Wickerfolk can scale out of it. It's an artifact. You have Patchwork Beastie that doesn't get hit by either. Keen-Eye Curator doesn't get hit by cut down. Fear of Missing Out can, but it's a nice engine piece. Breakout can haste out. You can do huge amounts of damage with extra combat steps and Violent Urge giving double strike. There's also the combo of Wrenn and Realm Breaker. If you animate Restless Ridgeline, you get the added bonus in terms of the attack. And if you get extra combat, you get 2 of the pumps in terms of your attacks. Cheap removal, you have protection effects, Paw Patch, again, Pyroclasm for go wide. A lot of your bodies are 3 toughness. Vengeful Possession, and then Untimely Malfunction can get rid of blockers. You can do the redirect, but for the most part, I would think this is get rid of like 2 big blocks. We have Azorius Tokens, 54%. This one here is just your, in the main board, it's basically mono white tokens with a negate, Meticulous Archive, Sunken Citadel. You have some kind of tap lands that can produce blue, as well as the treasures that you make from Fountain Port. Kind of Tried and True, Enduring Innocence, Caretaker's Talent, draw a bunch of cards, just kind of grind them out effect. Cheap removal, Exercise is pretty flexible, hitting a bunch of targets, negates, Jason the Mirrors, kind of domain decks. It's a mill effect, bunch of cheap sweepers, some cheap removal and ossification, Lorn, and rest. I am just going to check because I think I might have clicked over Dimir if I'm just going crazy. Did I click over? There's nobody playing Dimir? Hold up. I'm going nuts. I had a filter on. So Dimir, let's pop this bad boy open. So Dimir is actually the highest win rate. That was my mistake. So I will update that. So Dimir, we're seeing Preacher of the Schisms in here. We have just cheap counters. We see the Fairy Mastermind, Blood Pit Drowners, Tempo Elements. You can tap down. Works nice to kind of rebuy with the Kaidos. Saiba Cryptomancer as a protection effect with like Hexproof. It's also a ninja for Kaido, which is incidentally pretty cool. You see Preachers kind of for the mid-range battles. Tashana's activated abilities. And then Soulstone Sanctuary is a nice beatdown play that also is a ninja, so it can incidentally just get really big with Kaido pluses. Cheap removal, hand hate, graveyard hate, some cheap counters, just an assortment of removals for the grindier matchups. You have like creatures, Tashanas for activated abilities, Jelly for the grind fest, and then Expand as a sweeper. Moving on. So 2 decks to keep an eye out that are doing well in leagues. We have the Selesnya Cage deck. So Collector's Cage, one of the big scorecards. Hideaway 5, you look at the top 5, put a card under it, and then for a mana, you could tap, put a counter on target creature. Then if you control 3 creatures with different powers, you may play the card without paying its mana cost. So some of the people have tried like, you know, Cheat Out Atraxa, Portal to Phyrexia, stuff like that. But this one's just kind of value engine. Overlord of the Mistmoors is a good hit off it, but you can still just cast it for Impending, so you kind of get that value there. You have Paw Patch Recruit in here, Sandstorm Salvager, another big scorecard. It makes 2 bodies, and then you could put a counter and gain trample 10 to turn. So you're just kind of playing a value tokens deck that incidentally can just pop off. Sky Knight Squire gets really big with all the creatures coming in. Soul Partition, Sheltered by Ghosts as removal. Devout Decree got reprinted, exile black or red stuff. Soul Partition, cheap exile, Phyrexian Censor for any deck that's playing a lot of spells. The Otter decks, Prowess decks can be reasonable. Even Interrupter as a counter spell kind of effect. Rest in Peace for graveyard hate. Paw Patch, as we've mentioned time and time again. Then there's this Jund Overlord deck that's been popping up the last couple days. This one here. So you have Aclazots, Overlord, Shelly, and Overlord of the Boiler Bridges. Up the Beanstalk deck. So kind of just playing more Jund stuffs. Dragonfires, Go for the Throats, Cover-Ups, Maelstrom Pulse, Herd Migration. So just grindy mid-range deck that also can pretty much answer any type of threat, and then just play out big kind of bodies that beat down. In terms of the mana base, what are we looking at? Blazemire, Karpusin, Sunken Citadel. You have 4 Restless as the creature lands in there. Forge for the grindier matchups, Robbery over the top. You have like Nissa as graveyard hate, Frillbacks. A lot of these cards we've mentioned time and time again. And then 2 community decks. This one is from FM Macau's 4226 into Mythic with Sultai Roots. So Insidious Roots cares about cards leaving your graveyards. You make tokens and they can tap for mana. With Tyvar out, they can instantly tap for mana since it's activated abilities. So it's kind of your Roots deck that we've seen in the past being Golgari, but this one also has Oculus as a backup plan that can just cast and give you a big body. The cards leaving the graveyard also would work with Insidious Roots. Self-mill with Overlord. You have Rebel Belt Maka that can self-mill. Haywire Might gets you up ahead. And then you just kind of grind them out. No One Left Behind is also a cheap way to reanimate some of your creatures. Each instance of Scavenging Ooze exiling a creature counts as independent instances, so Roots would trigger each time. Haywire Might, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Fairy Mastermind against decks that are drawing a lot of cards. Kind of get that value engine. Ooze as graveyard hate. Frillback as kind of, again, Artifact, Enchantment, Graveyard Hate, stuff like that. Urtai is kind of a creature counter spell. Skylasher is removal, and then a Fountain Port for the grindier matchups. If you're going to 4 mana, you have to bring in another land. And then lastly, we have, this is a cool one, Juniper and Friends. They went 22 and 11. This is Jeskai Midrange kind of Prowess. So Narset, the Exile, Enlightened Exile. So we haven't seen much from this set. It was the analog, whatever, the kind of failed here's 3 packs in your 3 cards in your pack. 4 mana, 3/4. Creatures you control have Prowess. When it attacks, exile non-creature, non-land with mana value less than Narset's power from your graveyard and copy it. You cast this card without paying its mana cost. So kind of a Spellslinger-esque deck. You have Kaikar, Zephyr's Awaken. 4 mana, 3/4 flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature, exile target creature control, return to the battlefield at the beginning of your next end step, or you create a token. So it's kind of a young Pyromancer-esque. Your tokens draw you cards. Third Pass Iconoclast draws you cards with this. So you have kind of a token prowess theme. Surge of Salvation for protection against a lot of the common removal. Cheap removal, counters, card draw, sheltered in here, taking effect. And then you have like Authority for the aggressive decks, Exercise, which we've mentioned. Cheap counters, cheap removal, Pyroclasm for the aggressive decks, Forge for the grindier matchups, and then Day of Judgment catch-alls. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking, and we'll catch you next time.